Hello everyone and welcome to The No Show. I'll be your host Nathan Orenstein, and today I'm going to be ranking every movie directed by Christopher Nolan. If you're unaware, Christopher Nolan is the filmmaker behind some of the biggest hits of the past 25 years, including the Dark Knight trilogy, Inception, and most recently, Oppenheimer. And while yes, his films are typically mega hits, they're also pretty damn good as well. And for some additional context, I've seen all these films at least 3 times, with the exception of Tenet, which I've seen twice, and Oppenheimer, which I've seen just once. I don't want to waste any more time, let's get right into the ranking. At number 12, we have 1998's Following. Following is really the only film on this list that I don't see much reason to watch, unless you're going through Nolan's entire catalog. It's about a man who follows people around just for the hell of it in London, and the criminal activity he finds himself involved in after being caught and befriended by a burglar he happened to be tailing. Following, Nolan's feature film debut, is truly an outlier among his other films. It was made with a micro-budget of about £6,000, it's only 70 minutes long, and it was shot entirely in black and white. It's not completely out of place though, as Nolan was already experimenting with nonlinear storytelling, something that would eventually pop up in many of his films. Unfortunately for Following, the presentation ultimately just comes off as amateurish. The acting is bad, the story is bad, and the decision to present the narrative out of order just doesn't really feel justified when all is said and done. I do think the decision to shoot in black and white was a great one though, and the cinematography as a whole is quite good. But at the end of the day, Following comes off feeling like the product of an amateur, with their sights set too high for what they were capable of at the time. At number 11, we have 2020's Tenet. I'm not even going to bother explaining what Tenet's about, because I'm not entirely sure Tenet even really knows what it's about. Basically, all you have to know is that some objects, and even some people, can move backwards through time. If that sounds ridiculous, it's 'cause it is, and Tenet ends up having the goofiest and most confusing plot of any of his films. It doesn't help that none of the characters are memorable at all, aside from what could only be described as Kenneth Branagh's parody of a Bond villain. What is memorable, though, is the action, and how Nolan somehow manages to make certain things move forward and others move backwards through time in the same scene. I truly don't understand how he did it, but he did, and it's pretty incredible to watch. Aside from that though, I just can't really recommend this one, and I actually like it even less than Following, even though I recognize this as a better film. Nolan's obsession with controlling time finally caught up with him, and Tenet feels like a huge swing and a miss. At number 10, we have 2012's The Dark Knight Rises. New big bad supervillain Bane comes to town with his team of mercenaries to basically capture the entirety of Gotham City, and Bruce Wayne's got to come out of retirement as Batman to stop him. The Dark Knight Rises, in my opinion, is the only film of Nolan's where it feels like he's not in control. It's simply too big of a movie with too many characters and too many subplots, and he just isn't able to handle it all in a satisfying way. Tom Hardy's Bane is a great, iconic villain, and he's easily the best part of this film. His towering presence feels almost insurmountable, and Batman's mission to defeat him feels pretty hopeless most of the time. It's a great power dynamic that sees our hero on the outskirts. The problem is that our hero's hardly ever around. I swear Batman's on screen maybe 45 minutes of this nearly 3-hour film, and the remaining time is spent with Anne Hathaway's Catwoman and Joseph Gordon-Levitt's Officer Blake, neither of which are interesting or compelling characters. The plot also jumps weeks at a time with practically no explanation, and it all just feels a bit clumsy. At the end of the day though, you still get some great Batman moments and some great action, but this really does not come across as a fully cohesive experience, and it's a pretty disappointing conclusion to the Dark Knight trilogy. At number 9, we have 2002's Insomnia. Insomnia is about a Los Angeles detective who is sent to a small town in Alaska to investigate the murder of a young girl. The sun never sets in this town, and the detective's lack of sleep from insomnia causes him to accidentally shoot and kill his partner, and he eventually has to work with the killer in order for them to both cover up their tracks. This is actually the only film of Nolan's that he didn't write, and it's a remake of a 1997 Norwegian film. While it's nothing special, overall, Insomnia is a good detective thriller that's anchored by strong direction from Nolan and solid performances from Al Pacino, Hilary Swank, and Robin Williams. While it's a good enough movie, it's also kind of forgettable, as this doesn't really have any sort of Nolan spin in the story or the way the narrative is presented. But it's worth a watch if you're into detective movies, and I can't take that away from it. At number 8, we have 2017's Dunkirk. Dunkirk is Nolan's first historical film, and it depicts the Dunkirk evacuation of World War II from the perspectives of the land, air, and sea. It's also noteworthy that these three perspectives each have differing timescales too, as the stuff on land takes place over a week, the sea over a day, and the air over an hour, before they all culminate at the same point in time. I think this is pretty genius and spices up a genre that's admittedly been done to death at this point. Dunkirk also features absolutely breathtaking cinematography and a Hans Zimmer score that honestly makes the entire film. For me, though, the characters and individual stories across the three previously mentioned perspectives just aren't enough to fully grip me. Nolan intentionally put the focus on the cinematography and music and chose to rely on very little dialogue, which I think is very respectable, but just doesn't keep me completely engaged. I will say, the first time I saw Dunkirk was an incredible experience, but each subsequent watch has felt just a bit more underwhelming, which I do think is worth pointing out. The initial awe did wear off for me, but if you haven't seen it yet, it is 100% worth checking out, specifically with the nicest TV and nicest speakers you have access to. At number 7, we have 2005's Batman Begins. Batman Begins serves as an origin story for Christian Bale's Batman and sees him going toe-to-toe with villains Ra's al Ghul and Scarecrow. For me, Batman Begins is a story of two movies. The first one is the origin story, which shows Bruce Wayne becoming Batman. To me, this felt pretty rushed, and it kind of just happens. The character motivation is kind of whatever, and the training he goes through to become Batman isn't particularly interesting in my opinion. But from the moment Bruce Wayne first suits up as Batman, Batman Begins is off to the races. The Gotham City that Nolan has created for Batman Begins is grimy and seedy and lends itself to a much darker tone than was previously expected from superhero movies. It's a violent film too, and this is really Nolan's first time dabbling with action. It's got a rip-roaring pace and is ultimately just a great time overall, whether you like superhero films or not. While it pales in comparison to its eventual follow-up, Batman Begins is still a great kickoff to what is easily the greatest superhero trilogy of all time. From here on out, I really wouldn't argue if you called any of these 6 films Christopher Nolan's best. But at number 6, we have 2000's Memento. Memento is about Guy Pearce's Leonard Shelby, who has short-term memory loss, meaning he can't form new memories. All he remembers is that his wife was brutally murdered, and he's trying to find and kill the man who did it. Leonard has to take notes of everything, and even tattoos the most important pieces of information to his body. Memento is most notable for having a narrative that's presented backwards, with each scene taking place after the one that follows it. It's not as confusing as it sounds, though, as the plot is fairly simple, but it really makes the viewer closely follow the events as they unfold. What we're ultimately left with is probably the most unique neo-noir film of the past 25 years, and also one of Nolan's bleakest stories he's written. If I were to complain about anything, it's that I don't love Guy Pearce's performance here, but we're also at the point of the list where I've got to start nitpicking. At number 5, we have 2014's Interstellar. It's set in a dystopian future where blight and famine are ravaging the planet, and the only real solution is to find a new home planet for mankind. Farmer and former NASA pilot Coop, played by Matthew McConaughey, is asked to lead the expedition, which requires a small group of astronauts to travel through a wormhole in order to look for suitable planets to live on. Interstellar is a tough film for me to rank, because I think the first 2 hours or so of it are pretty much perfect, but I really don't like the ending at all, and it kind of reshapes how I think about some of the events in the film. Regardless of the ending, though, which some people understandably love, Interstellar still does so many things right. For one, it's Nolan's most emotionally resonant film. Despite its strong sci-fi leanings, Interstellar is incredibly grounded and cuts to the core of the emotions and motivations of human beings. McConaughey, in particular, is fantastic here as a dad just wanting to do what's best for his children, and Interstellar was right at the heart of the McConaissance. It's also a visual marvel, with its depiction of space travel and the fake planets that the crew visits. Hans Zimmer's score is also probably the most iconic original movie soundtrack of the past decade, and for good reason. And of course, Nolan gets to mess around with time, but this time in a more science-y way that I won't spoil here. So while the ending still bothers me every time I watch it, Interstellar is still an amazing film, and I still couldn't recommend it anymore. At number 4, we have 2023's Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer follows the life of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the physicist that led the Manhattan Project, which saw the creation of the world's first atomic weapons. Oppenheimer is a hulking beast of a film. It's 3 hours long, dense as hell, and easily Nolan's most devastating work yet. He manages to turn a biopic into a thriller epic, complete with his most non-linear story and arguably his best direction to date. It's led by an incredible performance from frequent collaborator Cillian Murphy, along with standout supporting roles from Emily Blunt and Robert Downey Jr. Its dialogue is fast and impactful, and it's the rare film where pretty much every line of dialogue feels essential. The gravity of the film is immense, and I was physically exhausted by the time it was over. Funny enough, my only real gripe with it is that I wish the film didn't rush through Oppenheimer's early days so quickly, but at 180 minutes already, I appreciate the brisk pace more than I miss that extra background info. Oppenheimer is going to be an award show juggernaut by the time Oscar season rolls around, and for good reason. It was refreshing to see Christopher Nolan stay grounded after the absurdity of Tenet, and the spin here on the historical fiction genre is even more refreshing. At number 3, we have 2010's Inception. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Cobb, a thief that is able to infiltrate people's dreams to extract information. He is offered a chance to regain his lost life by placing an idea in someone's head, and in order to accomplish that, he and his team must infiltrate 3 layers of dreams and survive the weaponized subconscious of the victim, as well as the persistent manifestation of Cobb's wife, played by Marion Cotillard. To put it in layman's terms, Inception is awesome. It's action-packed, it's mind-bending, and it features some of the coolest practical effects Nolan's ever put to film. The idea of infiltrating dreams and diving deeper and all this stuff might sound a bit goofy, but Nolan really sells the concept, and the world of Inception feels fully fleshed out right from the start. I do wish the characters themselves felt a bit more fleshed out, but the spectacle of Inception more than makes up for it. And if you haven't watched this because you've heard it's too confusing, don't listen to all that. There's 3 very distinct dream worlds going on, and the movie lays out the rules pretty clearly. You'll be fine, give it a shot. The final 2 movies of this countdown are truly masterpieces, and I honestly don't have a single bad thing to say about either, so it really just came down to my gut. So at number 2, we have 2008's The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight, as I'm sure you've heard a million times by now, is the greatest superhero film of all time. It operates more as a crime thriller, though, with one guy who happens to dress up as a bat and another that happens to dress up as a clown. This iteration of the Joker is the perfect adversary for Batman, though, and Heath Ledger's performance is terrifying, hilarious, and above all else, masterful. He's always just one step ahead of Batman at all times, acting more as a domestic terrorist in Gotham City than some comic book supervillain, which makes the events that unfold feel even more real. The back and forth between the two is executed with perfect pacing, and The Dark Knight never really stumbles once across its 2.5-hour runtime. It's got great and frequent action, great supporting characters, particularly in Aaron Eckhart's Harvey Dent and Gary Oldman's Commissioner Gordon, and it also features Christian Bale's best turn as Bruce Wayne/Batman. There's not much else to say other than this is a perfect crime thriller and a perfect superhero film. And finally, at number 1, we have 2006's The Prestige. It stars Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale as 2 magicians in 1890s London who start an obsessive rivalry over a teleportation trick. The Prestige is unfortunately one of Nolan's least known films, which might make this top spot pick a bit of a surprise to some. I get it though, it's a period piece about magicians, doesn't feature any exciting action, and is one of his most small-scale films. But I really implore you to give this one a chance. It's a masterpiece on all levels, featuring Nolan's tightest screenplay, 2 of his best leads, his most interesting mystery, and David Bowie as Nikola Tesla. What else could you ask for? It also has an ending that, for me at least, works in the exact opposite way as Interstellar's, meaning it makes me reevaluate the events of the film in a way that makes the movie seem even more impressive. This is one that's best experienced with as little information as possible, so I'll leave it at that, but I seriously couldn't recommend this one enough, and I think it's the best film in one of the greatest working directors' filmography. Well, that was my ranking of Christopher Nolan's 12 films. If you made it this far, thank you so much for sticking to the end. And if you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. And I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below on any of Christopher Nolan's movies if you've seen them. I've been Nathan Orenstein with The No Show. Thanks for watching.